Welcome back, or hello if this is the first video of mine you're watching, in which case you should probably start with part 1 since that's where I explain what I think about D&D puzzles. Here I'll just show examples of them and what can be done to make them work well. In part 1 I looked at 2 puzzles from official adventures, both of which turned out to be competent but not really meant as challenges you need to complete in order to progress, which is what I associate the most with D&D puzzles. So now let's look at some puzzles I found online. Maybe that's where that association comes from. The way I found these puzzles was by simply googling D&D puzzle and clicking on the first few links. Though I had to be quite picky with that, as many of them were closer to problems than puzzles. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you clearly haven't watched the first part, so what are you doing here? But while we're at that topic, maybe I should make another clarification between puzzles and riddles. Sure, there are riddles that are obviously riddles. You need to guess the word or phrase they're referring to. But consider this. I would call this a riddle, not a puzzle. The challenge here comes from guessing the goal, while in a puzzle the challenge would come from execution. You could think about this one as a riddle where the answer is play D, E, A, D on the piano. And maybe that's why I'm not the biggest fan of puzzles in D&D. Most of the ones I encounter aren't even puzzles to begin with. I mean, I've been quite selective when looking around the internet for puzzles because most of the stuff I found is more of a riddle or a problem, with only a few puzzles mixed in. And while problems are cool, I'm not the biggest fan of riddles. Much like puzzles, they have a single solution, but unlike puzzles, you don't get the rules. It's a guessing game and I personally dislike that. If there are consequences of a failure, I will overthink things and stall giving an answer. If there are no consequences, I'll be throwing out possible answers as quickly as I can come up with them. Neither of which I find fun, but both being the optimal choice in the given situation. Does that make the Brazier puzzle from Icewind Dale that I mentioned in part 1 more of a riddle? Maybe? It's a grey area. Every challenge of this kind is some superposition of puzzle, problem and riddle. But anyway, since I have now answered the question that made me create the first video, there's nothing left to do but look at some actual puzzles. Now I know this might be inconvenient, but I'm just going to put the puzzles on screen and talk about them instead of reading them out because it will save me time when making this video and I do want to upload it before the end of the year. So here's the first puzzle. I like it as an idea, and depending on how it's constructed, you could make this into an actual puzzle. Say a series of doors, each of the keywords or phrases toggling a set of them. Add to it traps triggering in different areas of the room for each keyword to make figuring stuff out more threatening. Maybe something like this. As you enter the room, you see a translucent wall of magic on the far end, and between it and the actual wall which holds the way forward, 4 magical gates. The second and fourth one are open, the first and third are closed. The floor and the ceiling are riddled with tiny holes. Engraved all alongside the walls are phrases like speak, the walls listen, let us hear your voices. There are 3 keywords that the room reacts to. The first one toggles the first and second door and causes acid to drip from the ceiling on the tiles adjacent to the walls, prompting a DC 13 dexterity saving throw, dealing 3d4 acid damage on a failure, none on success. The second one toggles the second and third door and causes poisonous gas to flow out of the floor and into the ceiling on tiles not adjacent to the walls. A DC 13 Constitution saving throw allows you to endure its effects, otherwise you take 2d8 poison damage. The third one toggles the second and fourth door and causes spikes of pale light to burst from the floor and ceiling in a checkerboard pattern, requiring a DC 13 Wisdom saving throw, dealing 2d6 psychic damage on a failure. I won't suggest the specific words to use, you should decide that yourself based on the words that you expect your party to be using. Better yet, wait until they start speaking in the room and pick the keyword out of the first sentences they say. You could then do the same for the other 2, though you will have to be careful not to pick words that they've used before, or have the other 2 already prepared. Though one issue this puzzle has is a bit of a dissonance. A notable thing about puzzles, as well as riddles, is that they are challenges directed purely at the players, not the characters. And because of that, playing in character usually just stops. Because you have to progress one way or another, and playing true to your dump stat 8 intelligence will not help anyone. As a result, players would most likely discuss the way to solve the puzzle out of character. And while the writings on the wall may push them in the right direction, it might not be enough. In my search for these puzzles, I've come across a saying that of any 3 given clues, the party will miss the first one, misinterpret the second, and dismiss the third. So maybe more incentive is needed. Maybe you need to make the players want to talk in character. Some of the writings on the walls could prompt just that. Share your secrets. What is it that you hide? Maybe something even more specific to someone's backstory. I don't know if it would work as well as I imagine, but it could make for a fun cliffhanger when one character begins sharing something about their past, just to be interrupted by the gates slamming open or shut, and the trap triggering, leaving them to figure out what may have caused it. Or maybe we can go in a completely opposite direction. If you made a whole dungeon themed about fourth wall-ish mechanics, it could work perfectly fine. You could even make it so it specifically reacts to out-of-character talk, including players describing their actions, and the writing on the wall could be more along the lines of "let us hear the ones above." I can imagine this making for quite a fun and unique session. Right, this puzzle. Again, a cool idea with absolutely no specifics. So I had to design an example myself, and this one took probably around 2 hours. It looks chaotic at first glance, doesn't it? Well, let's break it down. The maze is divided into 16 rooms, and with the exception of the 2 archways that lead out of the maze, all of them are marked with a color which indicates what size you will become after passing through. Blue for huge, orange for large, green for medium, and purple for small. And yes, I know that small isn't used in 5e as half of medium, but I don't care. If you think that's an issue, you can change what you call it and keep the mechanics the same. You can of course walk through any archway that is your size or larger, and when entering the maze, everyone's size is set to medium and restored to normal once they leave. Now, mazes are fun, but by themselves can be solved with trial and error, so I added 2 elements to require mindful exploration and teamwork. The first one is locked doors. The ones marked with numbers cannot be passed through until the corresponding lever is turned. Small levers can only be turned by small characters, as they are in alcoves that larger characters cannot reach. Large levers have to be turned by large or huge characters, as they are physically too large to be operated by smaller ones. All levers have to be found and turned to reach the exit. And the second element is parapets. The archways that are on parapets are placed high up, and to get onto one, or down from one, you need to be lifted by a character at least 2 sizes larger than you. And this is a good time to bring up the obvious. If you want this to be a puzzle, and not a problem that the players can avoid large chunks of, you will need to limit their options. For starters, you can say that the way the archways set the size overrides whatever your real size is, so using size-changing abilities won't actually change your size until you leave the maze. Secondly, flight, climbing, and fall damage negation can all negate the obstacle that the parapets pose. How to solve that, I'm not sure. Maybe just make it so they are unable to leave the ground unless lifted by a creature 2 sizes larger. It's arbitrary, and you would have to explain that as a rule at some point, but it's good enough for me because I've spent way too long designing the layout of this puzzle and I want to be done with it. Finally, if you want to try designing your own layout, which I do not recommend, watch out for places where players could get permanently stuck. That being dead ends past archways that players can cross while being smaller than the size of the archway. Something like this. The player walks in, hits a dead end, returns to the initial room, but because of how the archways work, they are now larger than before and can no longer fit the door they used to get there, and they don't have an alternate way out. There are other design concepts I could share, but I don't think anyone cares, and I'm tired of this specific puzzle. Let's move on to the next one. It's a neat idea, but this is an idea for a puzzle, or more of a dungeon-wide set of puzzles. Point being, it's once again not a ready-to-use puzzle, and I am not designing a whole dungeon right now to realize this idea properly. But I suppose I can give you one puzzle for it, a tutorial of sorts. You see, a series of puzzles like that, connected by a single dungeon-wide theme, is actually a fantastic way of implementing them, as you can teach players the core mechanics in an easy version of a puzzle, or even one that's already solved, later finding a body of another adventurer who didn't get too far. And then, as they go on, challenge them with harder variations on this one core idea. It's similar to how Legend of Zelda created dungeons around 1 or 2 mechanics. For instance, wind and the icicles in the Tears of the Kingdom's Wind Temple. Anyway, this is what I came up with. As the players travel through the corridors of the ancient temple housing the artifact, following the trail of a treasure hunter that seems to have beaten them to this place, they soon come across a corridor buried by rubble, the trail coming to a sudden halt just before this dead end. A stopper from a potion vial is lying there in plain sight. The players hopefully figure out that the treasure hunter drank the potion, and that they should do the same, which will result in them finding themselves in the past before the temple fell into disrepair. They are free to continue on, but as they round the corner, they come across a pair of temple guards standing over the body of the treasure hunter. They immediately notice the party. "There's more of them," one will call out, readying his weapon. And combat begins. Combat which should be absolutely one-sided, the guards shrugging off most of what the players can throw at them, and dealing plenty of damage in turn. Then, a round or two into the combat, the potions run out, the players being brought back into the present, hopefully on the opposite side of the rubble blocking their passage. Because yes, you probably want to give the potions a maximum duration to make sure players can't get stuck in the past. A very basic puzzle like this should do a good job introducing the core mechanic of the dungeon. Then, a later one can teach the players that drinking the potion in the past brings them back immediately. And I think that's all I have to say about this one, so let's move on. Well, as nice as it is to finally find an actual ready-to-use puzzle, this one is quite bad, as there is no space for deduction. It will be either stupidly easy or complete guesswork, depending on whether or not your party has comprehend languages. Not exactly the balance you want in a puzzle. Can we fix it? Yes, I think so. We could present the puzzle in a similar way, but tailor it to the party, making sure to include languages they do and do not speak, and setting the locks up in a way that gives players enough fragments of information to try and figure it out. Though, to make deduction reasonable, you would probably need an additional piece of information. Something like this. There is a set of 8 locks, each has writing next to it. The writing alternates between 2 exotic languages, one that someone in the party speaks, and one that none of them do. Each lock has a word and a number next to it. You can tell that there are 2 different words and 3 different numbers in the language you don't know. The number represents the amount of adjacent locks which have to be opened, which is an information you might want to give to your players as a hint if they don't figure it out themselves. And this is as good of a place as any to go on another small tangent. Hints are something that you really should consider implementing into your puzzles. Specifically, you could allow players relevant skill checks to give them previously prepared hints that make the puzzle easier, but doesn't bypass it completely. For instance, in the size-changing maze, something like a perception or investigation check could result in one of the characters realizing that you can change your size to a larger one if you go through an archway that is larger than your current size, then go back through the same archway, as it is possible that players will overlook it as a possibility. If you don't mind some extra work, you could do a similar thing with riddles, where if the players struggle, you could request relevant checks, and on a success, add a few extra lines onto the riddle. The players still have the riddle to solve, but the extra information narrows down what the answer might be. Now going back to the puzzle, it of course won't work for a party with comprehend languages or another similar effect. Though if such a party doesn't have a rogue, you could have the unreadable part be in Thiefskant, or better yet, the writings, instead of different languages, use different ciphers, and the players have figured out or have been given the key to only one of them so far. For the next puzzle, we have this. This definitely could work. If you want it to be more of a puzzle, you could give players mirrors. If a problem, don't, and have the players get creative with the reflective items they carry around. Well-polished weapons, armor and shields, perhaps someone has a mirror from a disguise kit or a monster hunter's pack. One thing I would change is that I would either include a magnifying lens among the mirrors to make it more logical that the light can burn the paper, or don't use the paper but instead a crystal or an eye or a sphere of magical darkness, or something like that above the door. Something that could reasonably interact with just light. And well, while this puzzle is competent, it does not come with a pre-existing layout, so here you go. The room is clearly in disrepair, and though perhaps once it was easy to reflect all the light beams coming from the ceiling at the crystal above the northern door, now the rubble makes it much more of a challenge, especially with most of the spare mirrors broken, leaving only 6 in a usable state. And here's how you can solve it. Because you need 1 mirror for each light beam to make it travel horizontally, you only have 3 left to actually reflect it wherever you need it. And neither blue nor red can reach the green with just 1 reflection. Well, blue can, but then it blocks green's only 1 reflection path. So you have to have 2 beams share some mirrors. And moving on, we have this. You have no idea how refreshing it was to see this straightforward puzzle that I didn't immediately recognize, after slogging through many websites that promised puzzles but delivered only vague ideas at best. Honestly, I don't have much to critique about it. It's a solid puzzle. One with 2 ways to bypass it, which the creator of the puzzle was clearly aware of. If you want to deal with them, you could first of all take away players' ability to light yellow flames. Perhaps special ones light flames of different colors, and the one for yellow is broken. Or candelabras can't have the same color on both sides as an additional rule. I personally like having the option of putting out the yellow candle to solve the puzzle, but if you want to prevent it, you could probably just require a different, non-empty set of lights on all 4 candelabras, which you would have to specify as the rules. Or make it so only one half of each candelabra is accessible to the players. Perhaps the candles on the left side of each candelabra are black and can be lit or put out. And I don't have much to say. This is another solid puzzle, and anything I would want to point out about it, the creator already has in the notes for the DM. I'm saving this website for future reference because those are fantastic puzzles, and move on because I won't be doing much constructive criticism here. Alright, I think that will be all for this part, because I don't want to spend a week editing this video. Subscribe if you're interested in part 3, where I will go over the rest of my barely comprehensible notes. Bye!